Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai. Kishore Kishori Ki, Go Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So good morning. Today we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 58. And the texts for today are 53, 54 and 55. So we can chant 53 together. Shrutva Ruru Dur Bhupam Nayantam Pat Kanyakam Bhagna Viryak Sudur Marsa Yadubir Go Vrishai Pure Shrutva Ruru Dur Bhupam Nayantam Pat Kanyakam Bhagna Viryak Sudur Masya Yadubir Go Vrishai Pura Shrutva Dur Bhupam Nayantam Patir Kanyakam Bhagna Viryak Sudur Marsa Yadubir Go Vrishai Pura. Please chant. Shrutva Dur Bhupam Nayantam Patir Kanyakam Bhagna Viryak Sudur Marsa Yadubir Go Vrishai Pura. Shrutva Dur Bhupam Nayantam Patir Kanyakam Bhagna Viryak Sudur Marsa Yadubir Go Vrishai Pura. Thank you very much. The word for word, Shrutva, hearing. Etat, this. Rurudu, obstructed. Bhupa, the kings. Nayantam, who was taking. Pati, along the road. Kanyakam, his bride. Bhagna, broken. Virya, his strength. Su, very. Durmarsa, intolerant. Yadubi, by the Yadus. Go, Vrishai, by the bulls. Pura, before. And the translation for text 53. When the intolerant kings, who had been rival suitors, heard what had happened, they tried to stop Lord Krishna on the road as he took his bride home. But just as the bulls had broken the king's strength before, the Yadu warriors broke it now. And text 54. Tan asyata saravratan bandhu priyakrit Arjuna Gandivi Kalayam Asa Shrimha Shudra Mirgan Iva. And the translation for text 54. Arjuna, wielder of the Gandiva bow, was always eager to please his friend Krishna, and thus he drove back those opponents who were shooting torrents of arrows at the Lord. He did this just as a lion drives away insignificant animals. And then text 55. Paribarham upagriyam dvarakam etasatmayam remeyadum nam rishabho Bhagavan Devaki Sataham. And the translation for text 54 or 55 is as follows. Lord Devaki Sutta, the chief of the Yadus, then took his dowry and Satya to Dwarka and continued to live there happily. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavan Ishvari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnebhyo namo namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presaya Bhutale Shrimati Ramapada Swami iti namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So beginning with text 53, which will be the main focus in this class. So there's a commentary from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur where he states that these kings that are mentioned in text 53, they were earlier on defeated by the bulls. So now these same kings come to be defeated by the Yadus. So we can recall that these kings, they had come as suitors to try and win the hand of Satya, Princess Satya. They were not allowed to marry Satya or Nagnajiti unless they could subdue these 7 sharp-horned bulls. So these bulls were actually extremely vicious and uncontrollable. And they could not tolerate even the smell of warriors. So that was given earlier on in this chapter in text 33. So Srila Prabhupada, when he's writing in Krishna book, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he describes the whole scenario. So he puts it this way. Many princes visited the kingdom and tried to subdue the bulls, But instead of controlling them, they themselves were defeated. Now, Srila Prabhupada continues. The news spread all over the country, and when Krishna heard that one could achieve the girl Satya only by defeating the 7 bulls, he prepared himself to go to the kingdom of Kaushalya. With many soldiers, he approached that part of the country known as Ayodhya, making a regular state visit. So that's Srila Prabhupada describing something of how this news that these princes were being defeated actually spread over the entire country, and the news traveled that there was this great princess that could be won, but only by a suitor who was able to subdue these very vicious and uncontrollable bulls. And Lord Krishna, being in a royal position, he actually then made a state visit to the king of Kaushalya and decided to undertake the well, he didn't quite decide to undertake it, but he decided he was going to gain the hand of this princess. Now, in the course of conversation with Krishna, so Krishna actually arrives there, there's a very nice reception, etc. And then there's a conversation with King Nagnajit. And King Nagnajit, he speaks on this topic of the bulls, because that's our verse today. And so he tells Krishna this: "My dear Lord, you are the reservoir of all pleasure, all opulence, and all qualities. The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, always lives on your chest. Under these circumstances, who can be a better husband for my daughter? Both my daughter and I have always prayed for this opportunity. You are the chief of the Yadu dynasty. You may kindly know that from the very beginning, I have made a vow to marry my daughter to a suitable candidate, one who can come out victorious to the test I have devised. I have imposed this test just to understand the power and position of my intended son-in-law. You, Lord Krishna, are the chief of all heroes. I'm sure you will be able to bring these 7 bulls under control without any difficulty. Until now, they have never been subdued by any prince. Anyone who has attempted to bring them under control simply had his limbs broken." So this is King Nagnajit speaking on this topic of the bulls and expressing his confidence that Krishna would be able to perform this task, and in fact even expressing his innermost thought, which had been that he had actually wanted Krishna to be the husband of his daughter, and that both of them felt the same way, both he and his daughter. And he gives a suitable recognition for Krishna's position both in the immediate circumstances as being chief of the Yadus, and also understanding his very glorious position on the transcendental level, that actually the goddess of fortune resides on his chest, and that he holds all opulences. Taking into account the position held by King Nagnajit, that is that he was viewing Krishna as the best husband for his daughter, he continues to make a request of Lord Krishna. So he directly spells it out. And this is Srila Prabhupada writing: "Krishna, if you'll kindly bridle the 7 bulls and bring them under control, then undoubtedly you will be selected as the desired husband of my daughter Satya." So Krishna hears this statement, And he understands that the king does not want to break his vow. So even though the king desires Krishna to be the husband of his daughter, and his daughter desires the same, he makes it clear, though, that he has made this vow that only the person who can subdue these bulls will be the husband of his daughter. So he makes it clear there's still that precondition to be met. And so Krishna understands that the king doesn't want to break his vow. So he immediately, he wants to fulfill the desires of the king because it's a saintly personality. And so what Krishna does, he tightens his belt and he prepares to fight with the bulls. We hear of this particular mannerism that Krishna has of tightening his belt before going into action. And if I recall, there's some mention of it when he's going to fight with the Kaliya serpent. There's the tightening of the belt. So he immediately, as soon as he's tightened his belt, Krishna divides himself into 7 Krishnas. And each one of them immediately catches hold of a bull and bridles its nose. So this was the resolution to the difficulty presented by the king. Krishna expanded himself so that there was an individual Krishna to deal with each of the 7 bulls. So this is part of that mystic opulence of Krishna, this capacity to expand in this kind of way and perform the particular function required in each of the particular expansions. In this case, it was an identical one of bridling the bulls. And Srila Jiva Goswami, he explains that the kings in their various lands, they came to hear what happened. So the news travels. So, it's done verbally, but the news travels. And what did the kings do? So they were the suitors that had originally come. They had been actually, had their limbs even broken by these bulls. So as opposed to remaining in their kingdoms and accepting that, well, they were already defeated, they couldn't tolerate the idea that Krishna had actually achieved this task. So they actually came to Kaushalya and they obstructed him on the road. So these same former suitors. And the explanation of why they did this is given by Srila Jiva Goswami, who says that they were extremely intolerant in nature. And the term used was Sudumarshaha. And they were also very proud of their heroism. So this pride did not get destroyed, even though the bulls had defeated them. They weren't even defeated by a fellow warrior. They were defeated by these bulls. So if one looks at what being tolerant actually is, because that's what's leveled against them, that they're highly intolerant. Just the fact that even with that defeat, they still had to act, couldn't tolerate that somebody had managed to do this task, meaning Krishna. So being tolerant is usually defined as being practiced to bear insults and dishonor from others. So in fact, it's actually one of the items or the indicators of carrying spiritual knowledge. A regular person functioning on a material level will immediately feel insulted if an insult is thrown at them. And they certainly won't be tolerant of, being treated unfairly or poorly. That's the general thing. I mean, you generally hear people start campaigns, or they start a protest, or they become vengeful. But to actually become practiced in bearing insults and dishonor from others. That's a completely different level of functioning. And Srila Prabhupada explains it this way. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. So persons have that nature that they're not really willing to bear dishonor from others or bear insults from others. I mean, the slightest provocation, you see fights breaking out and anger breaking out. I mean, anywhere in society you go, if somebody feels they've been wronged in some way, they're very vocal about it. So this is Srila Prabhupada explaining this in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the 8th verse. So these kings are described as being intolerant. So one could infer that they're not engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, as opposed to saintly kings and devotees and righteous brahmanas, who are mentioned by Krishna in the 9th chapter 34th verse of Bhagavad Gita, who are engaged in loving service to him. So those are the three categories that Krishna recognizes of persons who are engaged in loving service to him, and who therefore are cultivating this kind of capacity to tolerate insults. So the difference between these kings that have now come for a second time to King Nagnajit and are on the road obstructing Krishna, and the difference between them and saintly kings such as King Nagnajit is that in the case of the defeated kings, they're practicing just general conditioned life, or not even practicing, just living out conditioned life. While in the latter case, the saintly kings that are part of the three categories that Krishna gives that are serving him, there is actual association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Lord Krishna. So conditioned life, this thing of just living out one's life, not actually striving to have connection or association with the Supreme Lord, and therefore cultivate knowledge that pertains to how one conducts oneself and how the actions one's perform, coming from a place of knowledge and understanding, like a higher knowledge. And so if one looks at what conditioned life is, Srila Prabhupada's definition is that it's one wanting to continue the association with Prakriti, the female energy of Krishna, and be separated from Krishna by the illusion that one is able to enjoy Prakriti. So that's the definition of conditioned life. It's actually wanting to enjoy a material nature, which in fact is the female energy of Krishna. And by virtue of that approach and that attitude, it keeps one separated from Krishna. So association with the Supreme Lord or his associates, meaning going beyond staying in this illusory realm, that one is an enjoyer of material nature, it requires a change of consciousness. So this change of consciousness requires that one understands the Supreme Person in terms of his nature, his form, his activities, his pastimes. There has to be that attempt to understand it. So the consciousness has to shift. One has to make space for trying to understand who the Supreme Lord is form, activities, pastimes. So there's a contrast between those continuing their connection with illusion, of enjoying material nature, and those attempting to understand the Supreme Lord. There's a contrast between the two categories. And this is described in a statement that's made in a narration of the history of Ajamil. So here's this very interesting statement that shows this contrast between those who are just actually living a kind of illusion that they're enjoying, and those who actually have shifted their consciousness to trying to understand the Supreme Lord, and so that illusion is getting broken. So this is a very nice illustration of the difference, or something of the nature of the two categories of persons. Since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. But if in the human form of life he is taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotees, this position can be overcome. So this is Srimad Bhagavatam, the 6th canto, 1st chapter, 55th verse. So it's a very direct statement that it is possible to actually be taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this shift in consciousness brings a new understanding in relation to one's position, particularly with regard to tolerance. So because that's something of what is being illustrated by what we're reading today. And there's an excellent illustration of this position, that there has been a shift in consciousness, and there's a new understanding of one's position. So it's a different position. It's not that one is going along thinking, I can enjoy myself. Everything that's here is for my enjoyment. But rather, actually cultivating all the time some consciousness of the Supreme Lord. So this position, it's very interesting. It's taken it to the extreme. There's a situation in which Lord Krishna and the two Pandavas, Bhima and Arjuna, they're in disguise as Brahmanas. And they request a king, Jarasandha, who was known to be very charitable to Brahmanas, to grant them whatever they desire. So this is how they put it. Whatever we desire, that's what we're asking you. So they don't specify. And they give an explanation why there's no need for them to explain or to define specifically what it is that they desire. So they put it this way. And it illustrates this position of one having knowledge and understanding tolerance. This is what they say. So this is Bhima and Arjuna. What can the tolerant not bear? What will the wicked not do? What will the generous not give in charity? And who will those with equal vision see as an outsider? So this is the spiritual position. There's no limit. If you're going to give charity, what will you not give in charity? If you're tolerant, what would you not be able to bear? If you've got equal vision, which is also one of the aspects of spiritual knowledge, being able to see everyone equally, then who will you see as an outsider if you've developed that kind of vision as a result of becoming knowledgeable on a spiritual level? So this is what how they explain to King Jarasandha why they don't even have to specify. Just give us what we desire. They can just say that because they're coming from the position of saying that if you're actually in spiritual consciousness, then actually there isn't any limit in regards to tolerance, charity, seeing everyone equally. So this is Srimad Bhagavatam 10th canto 72nd chapter. And in the commentary to this explanation that Arjuna and Bhima are giving to King Jarasandha, there's a nice kind of exchange that goes on. So it's illustrated what would be the consciousness of one who is very much conditioned, meaning, believing that they're there to enjoy everything. And what is the position of someone who is has higher consciousness, is cultivating the association with the Supreme Lord. So this is how in the commentary is put. King Jarasandha could possibly ask, what if you request my son, from whom separation would be intolerable? So he's thinking of, so he has an illustration of what would be intolerable for one person who's in a conditioned state. Now, what if Bhima and Arjuna were going to ask for his son? Just imagining separation from his son is intolerable to him. And to this possible objection, this is what the Pandavas would reply. So this is the response of persons who are in consciousness of that association of Krishna, who've moved away from that illusory position of enjoyment, that things in material nature are there for one's own use and enjoyment. So they would reply, for a tolerant person, nothing is intolerable. And then here's just another example to illustrate it going a little bit further. If it's on the point of charity, King Jarasandha might say, what if you were to ask me to give my body or my precious jewels and other ornaments, which are meant to be given to my sons, not to ordinary beggars? So this could be somebody in that conditioned state, like King Jarasandha. And the possible reply on the part of Arjuna and Bhima, who are again in that high consciousness, this could be their reply to somebody like King Jarasandha. For the generous, what is not to be donated in charity? In other words, everything is to be given. And this can be quite challenging, even when one is trying to cultivate knowledge and association with Lord Krishna, and he has these extraordinary examples of his devotees and the highly knowledgeable states that they achieve, that allows this huge expansive vision of the world. One can see that even in cultivating spiritual life, one has to actually at times confront the conflict that comes there, because one is still in a conditioned state. So it may at times be challenging. What is one prepared to give in charity? How much is one willing to tolerate? And I mean, I can share, like in my life, I ran into a situation that was very objectionable to me mentally. Like I didn't find it acceptable, sort of being treated with a great deal of dishonor, so to speak. And I thought about it very carefully at the time when it happened. And the route I chose was to see it that what is being done by somebody is just a reflection on where that person's consciousness is at. So rather than taking on the person's insults, dishonorable or insulting and poor treatment of myself, I took it that actually I don't have to take that as now part of myself, because that behavior, that functioning just reflects where that person's consciousness is at. So even though it put me in a very uncomfortable position, emotionally, mentally, just by understanding that, it's made me very peaceful. And instead, I chose to look at how is it that I myself can actually develop greater tolerance for behavior of this kind that comes my way. And what I personally did was to actually look at how I could strengthen maybe a part of myself that comes more from childhood, because one carries the different bodies, mental bodies, as one's going through life. One carries those subtle bodies. So I thought, well, I'm actually going to look at the subtle body that's there of myself as a child, and where there is sensitivity of being able to tolerate some difficulties, and attend to that mental body so that that mental body is in place and I can proceed. So this is my way of dealing with developing greater tolerance for insult and attempted dishonoring. So interestingly, in terms of the pride of the kings, because that's another thing that's mentioned apart from the fact that they're intolerant, is that they were extremely proud of their heroism. There's a fundamental protocol for someone in the royal order, and I know I often bring this up, but it is very important to also remember that there's protocol for persons in the royal order. So their behavior and their functioning has to be in accord with protocol for somebody in that position. And there's advice that goes against action being performed in a prideful state. And this is the protocol, so the code of behavior for somebody in the royal order. Actions that are motivated by over-affection, one thinks of, that example given of King Jarasandha, arrogance, selfishness, or anger should be abandoned. So these kings, they described as being very much proud of their heroism. So it means there was arrogance. So an action that's motivated by arrogance should be abandoned. But we hear these kings, they're coming to obstruct Krishna once he's actually already won the hand of the princess. They're coming to obstruct him on the road, motivated by arrogance. So clearly they're going against royal protocol. So this particular protocol, it's given in a manual called The Way of Kings. And again, it is the position of seeing oneself as the enjoyer of material nature. So that's the position of these kings. And here's a description. Previously, these kings had been defeated by the bulls. Now they were being defeated by the Yadus. So this was a result of their action. They had to suffer defeat 2 times. And then we hear in text 54, indeed, and this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary on text 54, Arjuna easily dispatched them. That's the commentary. One sentence, which tends to highlight also how easily these kings were defeated, because clearly they'd performed action motivated by arrogance, so not a very intelligent action, and also, of course, it's a reflection on where their consciousness is at that moment in time. So they were very easily dispatched by Arjuna. That's Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. So Arjuna is being described as wielding, he's being described as being in the wedding procession, because there it is, Lord Krishna is traveling with his bride back to Dwarka. And so Srila Jiva Goswami says Arjuna was in the wedding procession, or there's also the possibility that Krishna had secretly summoned him, knowing that there was this problem with these kings. So he was able to dispatch these kings very easily because of his Gandiva bow. So as holder of the Gandiva bow, nobody could defeat him. But his performance of action is because he wants to please Lord Krishna. So it's from, again, the different perspective, the spiritual perspective, spiritual consciousness, the association with Krishna, viewing Krishna as his friend. And so not on a mundane level, but on a very elevated level. So he performs his action to please Lord Krishna. So there's a nice verse from Bhagavad Gita 3:27 that describes something of this contrast between the two categories of persons, those in material consciousness and those who are trying to develop their association with Lord Krishna, and so sort of break that illusory space of, just being there to enjoy material nature. So here it is: Prakrite Kriyamanani Gunai Karmani Sarvasra Ahankara Virmutatma Kartaham Iti Manyate. So that's 327. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. So this expands even the position of somebody who's functioning in a conditioned state, meaning that they're just functioning as their nature is dictating. It means that actually the goodness, passion, and ignorance is operating. So already they're constructed in a particular way that they're impelled to act in a certain way. So Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, he translates the same verse as the person bewildered by pride thinks that he's the doer of actions which are being done completely by the senses made of Prakriti. So that's highlighting something of how this illusory state is working. The person is believing he's doing the action. These kings are thinking they're obstructing Krishna, they're challenging him. But in actual fact, their pride is bewildering them to think in this way, because actually already the way they're constructed, their subtle body is constructed, their senses are constructed, they're constructed of material nature, so they have to behave in that kind of way. But they're thinking that they're controlling their actions, they're the doer of their activities. So there's a contrast between the kings in material consciousness and Arjuna working on the same level of fighting. So they're both fighting. They're Kshatriyas. The kings are Kshatriyas, Arjuna is a Kshatriya. So on a material level, they're performing the same activity. They're fighting. But they're on different platforms of consciousness. That's the difference. And Srila Prabhupada says, the person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that he's the doer of everything. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. So the generalization is that the materialistic person has no knowledge, that ultimately he's under the control of the Supreme Lord. So that's part of the illusion that the person in material consciousness is belaboring under. And it's quite an illusion if you think you're the doer of all your actions. But in actual fact, that's not the case. The body that you possess is produced by material nature, and it's working under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. So the such a person has false ego, it's called, because it's illusory, the whole idea of himself, herself is illusory. So the ego, that way that they're identifying themselves on the subtle level, is such that they take all credit for doing everything independently. And that's the symptom of being in a state of ignorance. Um, to independently be thinking I'm doing, or thinking that I'm doing everything independently. No one has any control over me. I'm in full charge of myself, and my capacities belong to me, and I'm free to act as I wish. So that kind of um, egotistical thinking falls into the category of being false, because of the fact that it's not actually, it lacks the spiritual understanding of that the whole body that one is inhabiting is made of material nature, and it is under the control of the Supreme Lord. So this can be contrasted with one whose bodily and mental activities are engaged in the service of Krishna, such as Arjuna. Um, so the ignorant person thinks that he's the performer of all his actions, which are actually carried out by the material senses, which in turn are the products of material nature. So quite different positions. So that was something that emerged from these verses. If there's any thought on the subject matter, please feel free to contribute.
Hare Krishna Mata, thank you so much for your class and your insights. King Nagnajit and his daughter both wanted Krishna to become the part of their family. But there's this vow Nagnajit has taken that this is the condition. The husband should satisfy, who the person should satisfy, whosoever will marry my daughter. And it kind of reminds me of this idea in this world. Seems to be true most of the time, that in order to get something you have to pay the price, and people say that you get what you pay for. This is the price that you have to pay. And even in spiritual life, the advancement in our spiritual life depends on the sacrifice that the practitioner makes of renouncing their desires and endeavoring to serve the spiritual master and follow spiritual principles more and more. And Arjuna, seeing from the materially perspective, to win the war, he lost all his family. But at the same time, this principle is present in everyone's life, devotee, non-devotee, doesn't matter. Looks like to me like that. But if it is the person is in a spiritual consciousness, they are not affected by the loss that or the price they have to pay in order to serve someone, but in order to get from one position to another. Like Arjuna acting in a spiritual consciousness looks like he's doing the same things, but not really. Not really doing the same things. Engaging in combat with other kings, but still. Am I able to paint a picture of what I'm thinking?
Yeah, so he was summarizing something of what you'd heard, and adding that the way you would understand things, that there's still that particular saying in life that there's a price to pay for what you obtain. And so you were seeing the contrast or you were seeing something of what was explained in terms of that particular phrase or understanding that there's a price to pay for what one wants through King Nagnajit having his particular condition that Krishna had to meet, or I don't know, you mentioned something of Arjuna, but having this, that there's a price to be paid. Well, it's an interesting thing. On a material level, one could say that, no pain, no gain is in the same category. That you actually have to undergo the sacrifice of something in order to get a particular result. That's what it means. So you're sacrificing some funds, some time, some strength to achieve a particular goal. So in the case of King Nagnajit, you could say that he made it clear that why he had set up this precondition for anybody coming as a possible suitor for his daughter was that he could actually be convinced of the power and strength of his future son-in-law. So he needed a visual display. He says it. So you could say, yes, he's wanting to see that his future son-in-law is willing to sacrifice some time, energy, strength to gain the hand of his daughter. It isn't a simple transaction. There has to be some display of it. Willing to actually go through a little difficulty. But for a Kshatriya, it should not be a difficulty. It should be welcomed, actually. An opportunity to fight and conquer. So you could say that in that case, yes, the possible suitors also had to pay a certain price for the bride, in one sense, you could say. But it should be according to the social position, the Kshatriya, that should have been part of their regular functioning. So not necessarily a huge sacrifice, but more like in line with their willingness to engage in combat of some sort. So this particular phrase that you brought up of there's a price to pay, if you were to apply it to spiritual life, and you mentioned, I didn't perfectly understand, but you mentioned something of, you adhere to the directions of the spiritual master. So it's sort of implying that there's some price to be paid for spiritual knowledge. It's quite different in terms of trying to cultivate spiritual consciousness, because the sacrifice that's involved is actually through the sacrifice, it's counterbalanced by the reciprocation coming from Krishna. So it's not that one is paying just a price to get some future goal. It's also that in the course of the sacrifice one is making, one's time, one's energy, one's thinking, one's material goods, whatever it may be, there is a reciprocal support that is being received from Lord Krishna throughout. And that support is actually makes it not a pain, but actually almost a joyful activity to be performing that sacrifice. Even though there is some cost, because one has to always make a choice to sacrifice. Yeah, so that's one thought of trying to think of like how there's a difference on the two levels of
Like
functioning.
in Kurukshetra, to win the war, in spite of acting from a spiritual consciousness, we see outwardly so many people died. Nobody was left from the dynasty in order for Maharaj Yudhishthira to become king. Even though Arjuna was acting from a spiritual consciousness, they might internally feel joy, but externally,
Yeah, well, King Yudhisthira was lamenting at the death of so many persons, just that had been the price that had to be paid, to use your expression, that was the price that he'd had to pay to be in his rightful position. But it was the dharmically correct thing that needed to be done, because all of the narrations that we hear of the Pandavas and the sufferings that they had to go through, or the obstructions in their life, had to do that there was a very irreligious act being performed by their relatives that were keeping them away from the throne. They were the correct rulers, they were the rightful rulers. So it was completely correct that that battle should have to happen, because it had come to that point that so many attempts on their lives had even been made to prevent them from being in the rightful position. So the fact that that war had to take place, and those persons that were obstructing um, uh, you could say, the dharmic well-being of everyone had to be wiped out. So yeah, so on the external level, it may appear that the price being paid was high, but it was the correct price, so to speak, using your expression. And from a spiritual level, throughout, the Pandavas were always joyful and in close association with Lord Krishna all the time. And there was constant support from Lord Krishna in so many ways. In so many ways. So they were, in fact, always in a joyful state. You never hear of them lamenting about that the kingdom is not theirs. You never hear that. But everything moved in the correct way because they were under the protection of Lord Krishna. And so all the actions they performed were in line with what Lord Krishna's desire was, which was also for the benefit of them and the whole population. So, yeah. But thank you for the discussion or opportunity to look broadly. Thank you. If there isn't anything else, thank you very, very much for your very kind attention. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.